My name is Amanda. I'm 34 years old. For 5 years, my mother-in-law was secretly destroying my marriage, and I had no idea. She smiled at me every Sunday, sat across from me at dinner, and slowly turned my husband against me behind my back. It took me 5 years to realize the problem was never me. It was her. I found out on a Tuesday afternoon in the most ordinary way possible by walking into a room I wasn't supposed to walk into at exactly the wrong moment, or the right one, depending on how you look at it. I met my husband Daniel when I was 26. He was 28. We were set up by a mutual friend at a dinner party, one of those situations where you're seated next to someone and end up talking until the restaurant is closing around you. He was kind, funny in a quiet way, not the kind of person who needed the whole room to laugh, just you. He was close to his family, especially his mother. He talked about her warmly and often. On our third date, he said, "She's going to love you." He said it with complete confidence, like it was just a fact about the future. I was charmed by that, by the closeness. I came from a family where emotions weren't discussed much, where dinner was a logistical exercise rather than a gathering. The idea of marrying into a family that actually talked to each other, that showed up, that cared, felt like something I had always quietly wanted. Sandra welcomed me with open arms from the very beginning. Homemade dinners every Sunday. Texts checking in, birthday cards that arrived exactly on time, always with a handwritten note inside. When Daniel proposed after 2 years of dating, she cried at the engagement dinner and held my hand across the table and said, "I always wanted a daughter." I believed every word of it. We got married on a Saturday in September. It was a beautiful wedding. Sandra gave a toast that made half the room cry. She talked about what a gift I was to her son. She talked about how happy she was to have me in the family. She looked directly at me when she said it. I didn't know, couldn't have known, that the version of Sandra who stood up and gave that toast was not the same woman who had been making phone calls and having private conversations for months. A version of her I would not discover for 5 more years. The first year of marriage was good. Not perfect, nothing is, but genuinely good. We were building something, an apartment we loved, a routine that felt like ours, friends who came over on weekends, plans for the future that excited both of us. And then, slowly, something changed. I didn't notice it all at once. That's the thing about slow damage. It doesn't announce itself. It just accumulates, the way water finds cracks in stone, small and patient and invisible, until suddenly the stone is broken and you're standing there wondering when it happened. It started with distance. Daniel became harder to reach, not physically. We still lived together, still ate dinner together, still went through all the motions of a marriage. But emotionally, he was drifting somewhere I couldn't follow. Conversations that used to flow easily became clipped. He'd come home from Sunday dinners at his mother's house quieter than when he left. Withdrawn in a way he couldn't or wouldn't explain. I asked, more than once, "Is everything okay? Did I do something? Are you unhappy?" He always said the same thing. "I'm just stressed. Work is a lot right now. Don't read into it." I tried not to read into it. I told myself he was right, that I was too sensitive, too anxious, that I was manufacturing problems in a marriage that was fundamentally fine. But it kept happening. Small things. Consistently. He'd make plans with his family, particularly his mother, without mentioning them to me until the last minute. "Oh, I told Mom we'd come over Saturday." Not we're thinking about it, not what do you think, just a statement of fact, delivered as though my input wasn't part of the equation. When I mentioned it, gently, trying not to start a fight, he would get defensive. She's my mother, Amanda. I can make plans with my own mother. Which was true, and somehow also completely missed the point. There were comments, too. Things that Sandra said, small things, said with a smile, that landed strangely. Daniel looked exhausted last week. I worry he works too hard trying to keep everything going, said directly to me with a sympathetic tilt of the head as though I were the reason he was exhausted. He was such a homebody before he met you. I sometimes wonder if the city life really suits him. Said lightly, conversationally, with a little laugh that made it impossible to object without seeming oversensitive. I just want him to be happy. That's all any mother wants, said looking at me with those warm eyes that never changed, that never gave anything away. I started to feel, very slowly and very quietly, like I was failing, like something about me, my personality, my choices, my way of being in this marriage was the problem. Daniel was unhappy. Sandra was worried about him, and I was the variable that had changed in his life. I started therapy in year 3. My therapist was a calm, perceptive woman named Dr. Reeves who asked good questions and didn't rush me toward conclusions. I told her about the distance with Daniel, about the comments from Sandra, about the feeling that I couldn't quite identify what I was doing wrong, but was certain I was doing something wrong. She asked me once, very gently, is it possible that the problem isn't you? I said I didn't think so. Daniel wasn't an unkind man. He wasn't cruel or abusive. He was just pulled somewhere else. And Sandra was lovely. Everyone said so. I kept going back to that. Everyone said so. As though the consensus of a crowd was evidence of a person's character. By year 4, Daniel and I were discussing separation. Not loudly, not with lawyers or ultimatums. Just the quiet, devastating conversation that happens when two people who once loved each other deeply find themselves asking whether they still do, whether the distance can be bridged, whether they want to try. We decided to try. We started couples counseling, and for a while it seemed to help. Daniel was more present, more communicative. I felt, cautiously, like something was shifting back toward us. Then came year 5, and a Tuesday afternoon, and a room I wasn't supposed to walk into. It was a Sunday in April. We were at Sandra's house for her birthday dinner, a small gathering, just family. Daniel's sister was there, his aunt, a few cousins. Sandra had cooked everything herself, the way she always did. The table looked perfect. It always looked perfect. After dinner, Daniel went outside to take a work call. His aunt and sister started washing dishes together in the kitchen. I offered to help, but they waved me off. Go sit down, enjoy yourself. So I wandered toward the back hallway to use the restroom. The hallway ran along the back of the house. Sandra's small study was off to the left, a room she used for her book club materials and what she called her correspondence. The door was pulled, almost closed. Not shut. Almost. I heard my name, my full name, Amanda, clear, distinct, in Sandra's voice. I stopped walking. I know I should have kept going. I know that. But you don't keep walking when you hear your name said in that particular tone, low, deliberate, careful, by someone in a room they thought was private. I stood in that hallway and I listened. She was on the phone. I couldn't hear the other voice, just hers. But hers was enough. She was talking to Daniel's cousin, Michael, a man I had always found pleasant at family gatherings, easy to talk to. A man, I now realized, who had been serving as a confidential relay point for years. What I heard in that hallway, in pieces and fragments over the next 4 minutes, rearranged everything. Sandra had been telling Daniel consistently and over years that I was unhappy in the marriage. Not that she was concerned about our relationship, that I was unhappy, that she had noticed things, that I seemed restless, distracted, like someone who wasn't sure she had made the right choice. She had been delivering this information to her son privately, in the quiet moments after Sunday dinners, in the middle of phone calls, with the soft, worried tone of a mother who only wanted what was best for him. She had been telling Daniel's family, his sister, his cousin, his aunt, that she was worried I wasn't the right fit, that I was ambitious in ways that didn't align with what Daniel needed, that she feared I would eventually prioritize my career over the family they all hoped Daniel would build. She had intercepted. Repeatedly. There had been at least 2 occasions when Daniel had planned something significant for us, once a weekend trip, once something I would only understand fully later, and Sandra had called him the day before, manufactured a family emergency or an urgent need, and pulled him away. He had apologized to me each time. He had not understood because he had not been told that the emergency was not an emergency. And she had done something else, something that, when I fully understood it, made my legs go weak in that hallway. She had found letters. Early in our marriage, I had gone through a period of writing, personal journals, letters to myself, working through anxieties on paper the way some people work them through in conversation. One of those documents, a letter I had written in year 2 of our marriage, at a low point, when I had been questioning everything and had written it down the way you do when you need to get something out of your head and onto paper, had somehow ended up in Sandra's hands. I had thrown it away. I was certain I had thrown it away. But Sandra had found it, whether from our recycling on a Sunday when she had come to help with something, whether from somewhere else, I still don't know exactly, and she had read it. And she had kept it. And she had, carefully and selectively, shared parts of it with Daniel, out of context, without explanation, framed as evidence of what she had been telling him for years, that I was unhappy, that I wasn't sure, that I might leave. I stood in that hallway for 4 minutes and understood 5 years of my marriage in a completely different way. The distance wasn't Daniel pulling away from me. It was Daniel pulling away from someone he believed was already halfway out the door. Because his mother had told him I was. Over and over again. In the softest, most loving, most concerned voice imaginable. I walked back to the dining room. I sat down. I accepted a second piece of birthday cake. I smiled when Sandra blew out her candles. I hugged her at the door when we left and said, "Happy birthday, Sandra." Dinner was wonderful, and I did not say a single word the entire drive home. Daniel noticed. Of course he noticed. He asked twice if I was okay. I said I was tired. He accepted that. He had learned over 5 years of a marriage shaped by his mother's narrative not to push too hard. I spent 3 days thinking, not reacting, thinking. I needed to be certain of what I had heard. I needed to understand what I was going to do with it, and I needed to decide something very important, who I was going to confront first. Sandra or Daniel. I chose Daniel. I chose him because none of this was survivable if he didn't know the truth. A marriage cannot be rebuilt on a foundation that still has the lie buried inside it. And I needed to know, before I did anything else, whether the man I had married was capable of hearing what I was about to tell him. I sat him down on a Thursday night. I had written notes, not to read from, but because I needed to have organized my thoughts before I opened my mouth. I told him everything. What I had heard in the hallway, what his mother had been telling him and telling his family, the letters she had found and kept and used, the emergencies that weren't emergencies. The steady, patient, years-long campaign to make him believe his wife was unhappy and uncertain and on her way out. He was very still for a long time when I finished. I watched his face while he processed it. I watched the moment when something clicked, when the years of distance and confusion and quiet withdrawal suddenly had a different explanation than the one he had been operating from. He said, very quietly, the weekend trip, when she called and said she was sick. Yes, I said. Another long pause. The letter. His voice was different now. Lower. I thought, she said you had written it recently. She said she'd found it in the guest room after you stayed over. She cried when she showed it to me. She said she was worried about you. I wrote that letter in year 2, I said. I threw it away. I hadn't looked at it in 3 years before she showed it to you. He covered his face with his hands. I gave him a long time to sit with it. Because I understood, in some painful and complicated way, that he was grieving something too. Not just what had been done to our marriage, but what had been done by the person he trusted most in the world. When he looked up, his eyes were red. He said, Amanda, I am so sorry. I said, I know. And then I said the thing that needed to be said. But sorry isn't enough on its own. We have to deal with this, all of it. Including her. He nodded, slowly, like a man accepting the weight of something he couldn't put down. I know, he said. I'll talk to her. I said we both will. We went to Sandra's house on a Saturday morning. Unannounced, something we had never done. She came to the door in her robe, surprised, her face moving quickly through confusion into its default setting, warm welcome. Daniel. Amanda, what a lovely surprise. Come in, I'll put coffee on. Mom. Daniel's voice was flat in a way I had never heard from him. We need to talk. We sat in the same living room where I had eaten 100 Sunday dinners. Sandra sat across from us, her hands folded in her lap, her face arranged in a careful expression of concerned attention. Daniel told her what I had heard. He told her what I had told him. He told her about the letter. Sandra's face moved through several expressions very quickly. Surprise, hurt, a flash of something else, too fast to name, and then back to hurt. I was worried about you both, she said. Her voice was soft, careful. The voice I now recognized as the one she used when she needed something to land a specific way. I was trying to help. A mother sees things. Mom. Daniel stopped her. The letter. You told me she had written it recently. A long pause. I may have misremembered when. You kept it, I said. My voice was even. I had decided before we came that I would not raise my voice. Not once. You kept a private letter that wasn't addressed to you, and you used it to make my husband believe I was planning to leave him. For years, you told him I was unhappy. You called him with emergencies that weren't emergencies so he would pull away from plans we had made. You talked to his family about me, about us, in ways we never knew about and never agreed to. Sandra looked at me for a long moment. And for the first time in 5 years, the warmth in her eyes did something I had never seen it do before. It flickered. Just for a second. Just long enough for me to see what was underneath it. She said, I only ever wanted what was best for my son. And I said, quietly, without anger, looking directly at her, then you should have tried to know me, instead of deciding from the beginning that I wasn't good enough for him. Nobody said anything for a while after that. Daniel sat forward and told his mother that things were going to change, that Sunday dinners were going to be less frequent, at least for a while, that conversations about his marriage were not going to happen without his wife present, that the dynamic, whatever it had been, however it had developed, was over. Sandra cried. Of course she did. She was very good at crying. We left before the coffee was finished. What followed was the hardest year of my marriage. Harder in some ways than any of the 5 years before it, because now we knew exactly what we were dealing with, and knowing made it impossible to pretend. Daniel and I went back to couples counseling. This time it was different. We weren't dancing around a problem neither of us could name. We were working through something specific and real. Our therapist, a different one than before, someone we chose together this time, said something in our second session that stayed with me. She said, "A marriage can survive almost anything that comes from outside it. What makes the difference is whether both people are willing to face it together." We were willing. That, I learned, was not nothing. That was, in fact, everything. Daniel's relationship with his mother changed significantly. Not ended, he is her son, and that doesn't dissolve, but restructured in a way that made it honest for the first time. There were hard conversations. There were silences. There was a period of several months where Sandra called him often, and he answered less than he used to. She told other family members that I had come between them. His sister believed her, for a time. His cousin Michael, who had been on the other end of that phone call, eventually apologized to both of us directly, in a way that surprised me. I continued therapy on my own as well. Dr. Reeves, who had once gently asked me whether the problem might not be me, listened to the full story and then said something I think about often. You spent 5 years doubting yourself because someone with access to your husband decided you should doubt yourself. The fact that you're still here, that you fought for this, that's not a small thing. It didn't feel like fighting. It felt like surviving. And then, slowly, like building. Daniel and I are still married. I want to be clear about that. Not because it's the triumphant ending I feel pressured to deliver, but because it's true and because what it took to stay is worth acknowledging. We rebuilt something. Not the same thing we had before, you can't go back to before, but something that carries the history and is still standing. Sandra and I are in the same room on major holidays. We are civil. We do not have a relationship beyond that, and I have made peace with that being enough. Daniel understands. He does not ask me for more than I can give, and I do not ask him to stop loving his mother. We have found together the precise distance that allows everyone to survive. It is not a fairy tale ending, but it is an honest one. And after 5 years of someone else's story being told about my marriage, I'll take honest over perfect every single time. She wanted me out of her son's life. Instead, she showed me exactly what kind of woman I needed to become to stay in it. And I did. I have one question for you, and I really want to know. Has someone close to you ever worked against your relationship so quietly that you almost didn't catch it? A parent, a friend, a family member. Because the most dangerous people aren't the ones who attack openly. They're the ones who smile while they do it. Tell me in the comments. Someone reading this needs to know they're not imagining it.